Okay, perfect. And the recording has started too. Fantastic. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's like we have just one more minute. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about leadership and professional development. As you start to think about it here in 2024, we thought it would be a great start to the year to kick off with some broader thoughts and goal setting. We are very pleased to be joined here today by Tina Butterfield, Ray Burgman Gallegos, and Laura Woodworth-Ney. A couple pieces of housekeeping before we start. You as attendees will be muted with your video off, but you are welcome to submit any questions through the Q&A box. You can feel free to introduce yourself to each other within the chat, and a recording of the conversation and all other details will be emailed to you no later than Friday, February 2nd. And we are right here at the top of the hour, so I think we can allow a little bit of conversation for the next minute as we allow attendees to filter in. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Ray Burgman Gallegos, our peer moderator for the day. Ray is the Vice President of Programs and Services here at WICHE, and we are very pleased to have her and her experience lead our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today for this conversation. There's something about the beginning of the year and really thinking about what are your next steps, what are the things that you're looking forward to. And oftentimes our leadership and our leadership development is a part of what we take a moment to reflect on and assess. So as Olivia mentioned, we have Laura Woodworth-Ney here with us, who is a principal at AGB Search and also the Western Academic Leadership Academy program mentor, as well as the person who's on site as the director of the program. And Laura has 28 plus years in higher education, including 23 years at Idaho State University, 3 plus years working in higher ed consulting, specializing in leadership support for governing boards and higher education institutions. She also has 10 years of service to the provost office at ISU, including 8 years as the provost and executive vice president. And during that time, Laura was also a tenured faculty member in the history department. So welcome, Laura, to this fireside chat and conversation about leadership development. All right, and then Tina is here with us as well. So Tina Butterfield is a professor of art in the art department at Western Colorado University and is also the chair of the art department. Tina currently has a project that is going where she is the lead artist working with a team of artists and writers, creating a book called Women of the Land of the Gunnison Valley, which if you've not had an opportunity to visit that part of Colorado is absolutely beautiful. So I imagine that the art coming out of that region of Colorado is equally lovely. Welcome, Tina, to this conversation. So we're going to jump right in and start talking about leadership development. Why is this important? And the place where we're going to start is with the two of you really talking about how you got to where you are right now. How did you arrive at your current leadership position? Or even if you want to talk about past leadership positions that you've had. And really, what has leadership development looked like in your career? So I'll start with Laura and then on to Tina.
Thank you, Ray. It's a pleasure to join all of you and to have this conversation because these conversations have been really important for my own career development. And I highly recommend that you continue to cultivate these connections over time. I had a really traditional academic career for a long time. I was a history professor. I loved that work. I was the chair of my department, but I didn't think that would necessarily mean that I would be an administrator forever. I thought it was a 3-year opportunity. It wasn't even a decision I made. The senior members of the department told me it was my turn to do that job. And so I took it, and then it became something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed that larger conversation about the institution and about the challenges that we faced as a department. And then I did special projects for the dean's office. And then I moved into an associate provost position. And then I was vice provost, and then I became provost and served for 8 years. And then at the end of that tenure, I realized that what I really loved about the provost job was working with faculty and working with the board, working with board in particular to advance initiatives. So that's how I got interested in working at the board level, working at the institutional level. And what the Association of Governing Boards does is supports governing board issues across the board. And we also help institutions hire presidents and cabinet members. And I'll let Tina take it from here.
Thank you. I am excited to share my experiences as well. I feel like after hearing those great experiences from Laura, mine are much smaller. I have been teaching for about 15 years, and I was really comfortable in that role. And probably like Laura, realized that with an ask of leadership, the leadership asked for us to find a new chair for the department and a divided department. And it was asked of me to move into that position. It had been on my radar over the last few years, and it just hadn't been the right timing for me. So it was luckily sort of everything, became the right time for me to move into that role as chair of the department. And that just happened this year, this last semester. So it's a new leadership role for me to really gain new understanding and new knowledge and new insight into the larger scheme of the university that maybe I've been working in for 15 years, but to have a deeper understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we can help our students further. In the past, I've done leadership committees, and in and outside of Western, I've had an opportunity to be on advisory boards for art centers, and as well as subcommittees that are similar to that. But this really is the first opportunity that I've had to really focus on my own professional development as a leader and what does that mean for larger university and where that will lead in the future.
Thank you both for talking a little or speaking a little bit about your own experiences in your career thus far. And one of the things that I realized recently, I was trying to come up with a really great metaphor for why it's important to invest in leadership development, why it's important for institutions to invest in kind of that succession planning, developing leaders at their institutions. And I said, in some ways, it's the same thing as when we look at the school, we look at all the buildings, all the facilities, all the infrastructure, and we say, okay, we're going to make sure that the buildings are well maintained. And the reason we do that is we don't want deferred maintenance. And so if we think about leadership in the same way in developing leaders at institutions, the investment, you see it pay back. You see it time and time again, not only for the individual, but you also see it for the institution. Now, when you're having to make some of these decisions, sometimes it's really challenging. It is hard. And I guess I'm wondering, in your own, like, thinking about leadership development and participating in it, and whether that's as a faculty lead or as a participant, you know, in what ways have these experiences informed the decision, that the decisions that you've made in terms of pursuing leadership development? Because it's never easy. It's never easy to decide, like, what exactly am I going to do right now? Tina, love to hear your thoughts on this.
You know, for me, it really was about the timing in my career and my own professional development of not having a whole lot of, I was almost like on a leadership journey of a self-guided, leadership journey. And so this really felt like the right timing to invest in it as maybe I embark in longer and longer term leadership roles, that to do it now, sort of at the beginning for me, to do it at the very get-go, really seemed like a really good opportunity to invest in myself. When you're talking, about metaphors, it was difficult to make the decision. Somehow I think it's always a little difficult to make the decision to invest maybe in ourselves, but it is a long-term decision that we see that investment moves through us, through the university, into programs, into students. And in the end, when I think about, why am I really here? Why are we here? Then that became clear that it would, long-term trickle down and understand to a greater degree that this was the right time. The timing for me was, at the start of that leadership experience. But it also was timing for my department and also for the university to embrace like a little bit more focus on leadership development. And so I think that worked really well for where I'm at. Laura, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I've been fortunate over the course of my career to have a lot of mentors. And I think mentoring is so important in all aspects of leadership. And sometimes it doesn't feel like mentoring at the time, but then when you look back on it, you realize that that person was a champion and a mentor. And those mentors have really helped me work through the difficulty of making decisions about what the next step should be. I think leaving a tenured faculty position, deciding not to apply for president jobs, and to leave a provost position to go into consulting was probably the most difficult leadership decision I've made, because it was different than what the linear progression is expected to be. And so I utilized a lot of mentors in making that decision, and talked to a lot of people who were really frank with me about what my skill set was and about how I could apply that in a different setting in higher ed. And so I think those mentors are important because they are able to give you unfiltered advice when you need it. And that sometimes is difficult to obtain in your career, especially once you become the person who is, in charge of the unit, the chair of the department, or the dean. People are less likely to give you unfiltered information. And so mentoring and programs that work on development are important to compensate for that.
Yeah. So Laura, prior to joining WICHE that I worked for an organization that focuses on leadership development for women who work in higher ed. And there are so many options out there for anyone who wants to pursue leadership development. And the both of you are connected to two of the ones that we have at WICHE. So Tina, you're in the first cohort of individuals to participate in the WICHE Academy for Leaders in the Humanities. So a focus just on that particular area. And then Laura, as I mentioned in your introduction, you're a part of the faculty as well as the lead for the Western Academic Leadership Academy. And, you know, when you're trying to make these decisions about which direction to go, which leadership development to tap into, Laura, you mentioned mentors, and I completely agree. Mentors have been so important even in my own career. I made that scary step of stepping away from a campus and really thought, oh, I'm stepping away, and became even more immersed in post-secondary education as I took on these roles within nonprofit organizations. You know, talk about a person, and you don't have to name names, but talk about a particular person who, you know, really impacted the decisions that you made, your advancement, and what was some of the advice that they gave you, and maybe just possibly will also trickle in, like, how do you find a mentor? What do you look for?
Well, a couple of things that really helped me along the way was participating in leadership opportunities like the ones Ray is talking about, the WICHE Academy. I was privileged to get to go to hers early in my career. Ray actually ran that organization for many years, and I was a new administrator at the time, so it was a really helpful experience. It was really important for me to get off of campus and to get out of the focus I had on campus, get out of my discipline, get out of the department level perspective. And even when I first went to the provost's office, it was important for me to get away from those very operational issues that were consuming my day because it was my job. But when I started going to leadership opportunities, I saw that conversation get elevated to the next level about what is the purpose of higher ed and why are we all engaged in this work. And that was what motivated me to move forward in the steps that I made in my career. In terms of finding mentors, a lot of the mentors I had came from those experiences. They were people I met at leadership opportunities or as I moved forward in my career, but they were very rarely people on campus. Although I did have some campus mentors. I had some bosses that were basically mentors as well, but that's not the mentoring relationship that can provide the most support because they're also evaluating you. And so I think most often mentors do come from adjacent organizations or maybe institutions in your state. And you can meet them, you know, through participating in all kinds of opportunities that arise at the state level or the regional level or at national conferences and meetings. And I'm sure Tina has some ideas about that as well.
I thought this was a great question. And when I look back, I feel like this, my growth this last semester was huge. And I really relied on my mentors during that time. And I think about like who those mentors are. And it's interesting that Laura had said some of them are part on, you know, on campus, but some are not. And I have a network of mentors that maybe have similar positions in a different way. I have a mentor that's in HR that's outside of my university, and she has been pivotal in understanding that leadership quality with faculty that is totally new for me. And then I have a mentor that has experience as a principal. And so having, again, sort of this background that is the same but different has been really interesting to see their experiences. The peer mentor that really has, I think, been pivotal for me during this time from Western has also been really important because these mentors outside of the university, their experiences I can gain a lot from, but sometimes there's things that are different. And having that peer mentor that maybe is just sort of one step more experience, little bit more understanding, really helps guide me on specific questions that I might have that really are related more to university setting. And that has been really important. I actually sat down with my provost and said that I wanted to have a pretty large input on who my mentor would be. Because I think that the best mentor relationship is one that you really you select, that you move towards that person. And she had some great ideas of different mentors, and I think all of them could have brought something to the table. In the end, I really did also need a mentor that I felt like was grounded, that maybe had enough experience that small things would sort of be understood at the level that they should be, where everything right now, to me feels pretty new and important. And so having that grounding is, I know, somebody that was really important to me. And that really has helped me, as those multiple mentors in multiple places. Where to find them? I think that has been, in a way, like self-selecting them, finding that person and really engaging them in conversation, following up, and not being afraid to ask, to say, here's the position I'm in, and would you consider helping me or mentoring me, because I see that you have these experiences. And sometimes being very direct has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, in my own career, I've had lots of opportunities to have mentors. And one of the first experiences I had where someone was officially named a mentor was in a fellowship program that I did. And it was a pre-doctoral fellowship program for folks who are interested in working at liberal arts institutions. And the program, the way that it was designed, it felt big and overwhelming, to have, I'll say, this much love from from other people, because we were assigned as pre-docs. We had a teaching mentor, a research mentor, and a life mentor. And it was like, okay, this is a lot of assistance and help. And it turned out that while I appreciated the comments and the assistance and support from the teaching and the research mentor, the person who impacted me the most was the life mentor. And this was someone who had not spent their entire career on the campus that I was on. They had been on, at other liberal arts institutions. And so really had a feel for life on the campus and life outside of campus, and was so helpful to me navigating that transition from being a graduate student to now being in a situation where I had faculty colleagues and students were looking at me in a different way. And so mentors can offer so much that sometimes, like I said, it can seem big and overwhelming, but I mean, she would invite me to small things like, come have coffee with me. And we would just chat about how things were going. And it didn't seem as big in that way, because she made it into something that was really a relationship and not so formal. Because I also went into it like, oh, this is so formal, because I'm being assigned to these people. And it was a experience that really changed how I saw post-secondary education, because I came in as a first generation student, and I, thought I'm going to get a PhD and then I'll be a faculty member and that's what I'll do. And I had not thought about things associated with the bigger universe of the institution or the bigger universe of post-secondary education. And she really opened that up for me as I felt comfortable asking her different questions. about things that I was noticing or observing. But yeah, such a great experience to have a mentor and to be mentored. And you know, I always say if you see someone who seems interesting to you, we all like to be asked about our career path and how we got where we are. And while it might not be someone who's with you for your entire career, it may be someone who's with you in a particular season of your career when you really need that type of guidance and support. So, you know, it's that first question, like, I just want to learn a little bit more about your career.
Yeah, Ray, I think that idea that you have seasonal mentors is important because a lot of these mentors are not necessarily people that you will always have with you. But one of the most important mentors I had was someone who worked in legislative affairs. And when I was the provost, I had to speak in front of the legislative committees, the ed committees, the House and Senate ed committee. And they always had a lot of questions about all the things we were not doing on campus and why. And that this mentor, I asked him if I could just shadow him for like a week at the legislative session. And he was kind enough to allow me to do that. And he introduced me to all of these people that he knew. He'd been in the legislature for many years, and it made a world of difference. And it was for that one period of time, but my ability to speak in front of legislative bodies after that was much enhanced. And that was good for my institution. And so I think sometimes we think these are selfish things that we are asking for, but in reality, it was good for my institution because I was able to utilize that mentoring to ensure that we were continuing to get funding. And so I think we can think about mentoring as beneficial to the institution as a whole.
And Ray, I'd piggyback on that comment about the life mentor being really important. And for me, I've been lucky enough that it seems like some of my mentors have also sort of meshed into a bit of those life mentor roles. And part of the reason of sort of why I think it works so well in my current position of having a mentor is that she really understands a deeper degree of what it means of where I'm at with where my life is at too. Just knowing that I have kids and how that works with work. I mean, I have one sitting across from me at my desk right now because Wednesdays they get out at 2. You know, it's like she understands how that functions and finding that balance, because I think that, you know, we have work and we have life, but a lot of times they're really not that separate. And that has been as important as the small logistical things of how do you deal with this, or, you know, what does your department do and how does this function? I think those bigger things to understand where life moves is as important.
So, you know, again, like, we take the word mentor, it seems like a really big, onerous task, and to find these folks. What about peers? People who are at similar places in their career to you. You know, what has that been like for you, finding individuals like that? And what have you gained from those types of relationships?
Well, certainly those peer relationships, I think, are really important for success in an organization because those are the people that you spend the most time with often. If you're a dean, the other deans are there with you. They understand what you're going through, and you can learn from each other throughout your tenure. And when I was the provost group that we had at the time in the state was just critically important to my success and ability to have someone to talk to. It's not like, you know, there are many, many provosts on campus. And so I was able to utilize those relationships to support my own work. If I had a question, I could call them. And so that was a type of mentoring, certainly, but it was also a type of peer support and encouragement. And I think utilizing opportunities to work with people who are peers outside of the organization is really important for building those networks.
And I think WICHE really gave me the opportunity, and my other peers of the cohort that we are of this humanities cohort. It has been fascinating to discuss, learn from them, see how their universities are handling or tackling certain things. And the growth from that is incredible. It happened pretty quickly, being able to hear how they're sort of, managing through their humanities fellowship, how they developed it. That's been really amazing to see outside of the university, and then peers within the university. I feel like, this is my team. This is who we're leaning on, that we are supporting each other, and we are finding, the path forward. And those people have been really helpful to answer, any questions. And I have lots of questions right now. It's endless questions of, it's amazing. I feel like when especially this last semester, as my first semester as chair and working under the provost, so many questions. I think that like 90% of my job I didn't know how to do. So it really was helpful to, have these other people that that feel more confident in some of these roles and that can easily help you through some of these positions.
So in the past, I've said leadership is lonely. And so hearing both of your comments, it's one of the reasons why cultivating peer mentors and also thinking about those networks of colleagues that you can ask those questions of, it reduces that loneliness. Because then you have someone who affirms whatever it is that you're thinking, and also ask you perhaps some of those challenging questions that you might not get from other people who are closer. So I've also enjoyed some great relationships with peer mentors and opportunities to watch networks of people, into like watch those networks and how the networks kind of work together and help one another out. So yeah. Now you received questions ahead of time, but we also are taking questions from those who are listening to us, and one just came in, and so I want to ask you this question before we run out of time, because this is a really critical one. And earlier, Laura, you talked about your pivot, and Tina, you're at a place where you're really thinking about like how you lead and what's next for you as a leader. Sometimes it is incredibly difficult to find your place as a leader, and so if either one of you or the both of you want to talk about how you have navigated the concept of imposter syndrome and overcoming insecurities in new roles, I'll also add in my thoughts on this as well, especially since I've had my own pivots and moves in post-secondary.
Well, one of the things I would say about this is that everyone has imposter syndrome, everybody. And it doesn't matter who that person is. And I work now almost exclusively with people who were formerly presidents and provosts at their institution, and now they're consulting. And what matters at this juncture is not what institution they were the president of or the fact that they were the president, but rather that, how many projects have they done that are similar to that institution's, and how can they help that place? And so even they have had imposter syndrome at times. So it's important that it's understood that everyone has it. I think for me, the best ways, the times when it's been the easiest to overcome have been when I was just thrown into something. That's not necessarily what's recommended in terms of developing. And that's why those networks were so important, because I didn't have the experience often that I would have thought I needed in that position. But if you're thrown into it and you start doing the work, you don't have time to think about the fact that maybe you shouldn't be there. The times when I had the most imposter syndrome were times when I was over prepared. And that's the irony of this, is that over preparing for leadership positions does not necessarily make that transition easier. Often, and I tell this to people all the time, because now I'm working with people who are applying for president jobs, but I tell people all the time that being over prepared for the president job is not necessarily the best way to prepare for it, because there is this mental component to it. And having the experiences that you've had are unique to you. And so that means that you are uniquely qualified for what you were doing today and what you will be doing tomorrow. But I mean, there are lots of strategies for managing this, and I'm sure Tina has experienced it as well, just and probably very recently. So I'll let her talk about those.
I think Laura's right. I think it's something, well, I know everyone feels this way. And maybe in the humanities, we get more experience with this just because, like, as an artist, you just always feel this way. Like, I have no idea how, this happened or this happened. And in fact, even applying for this WICHE fellowship, I remember, looking through, who should maybe apply or should I apply, thinking I definitely should not apply for this. And in the end, you just throw yourself in the ring, right? You just have to just keep, go to the next position and say, oh, we'll just see what happens. And you do figure it out, like ready or not, you just, figure it out. So, and maybe that's just a personal preference of, I tend to jump into the deep end kind of personality. But I think that it does help. I was recently able to go to the AACNU conference with the support of the WICHE fellowship, and just being able to see other people and get to talk to an individual, and for them to say, this is a position that I'm at, but here's how I got there. And you can sort of, you can mimic and you can see like, oh, I see where that's at. And maybe it's not as far-fetched as what you think. But I think that we all feel that way, definitely, recently moving into this role as chair, you just decide I'm doing the work, and the work is going to keep you really busy. And eventually you're going to feel like that role fits. I hope, you eventually hope that feels like it fits, but the beginning of everything doesn't feel quite right. And I think the more you do that, then the more you just understand and know that you're just going to keep jumping in the deep end and you'll swim eventually.
Yeah, I want to tap into something you just said, Tina, and remind everyone that we walk into spaces where sometimes the spaces were not designed or intended for us. And I say that as a woman, and I say that as a Black woman, that post-secondary in particular, I was not the person that they thought was going to show up. And especially my background is economics, my bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD are all in economics. So no one was looking for me. And when you walk into a room, there's this feeling of I'm not supposed to be here. And so one of the things that I tried on early on was to really think about myself as a learner, and everyone in the room was learning something, whether that was learning like that I was in the room, or we're learning about a new project or a new initiative together. So everyone is in that mode. And so the more that I could think about it that way, the easier it was for me to navigate some of these spaces that felt uncomfortable for me. The other thing, Tina, that you mentioned was the exposure to colleagues outside of your own institution. And I remember the first time that I also went to an AAC&U meeting or went to an ACAD meeting. It was like, I have found my people. So my people outside of economics, I have found them, and here they are, and they're talking about things that I find interesting or intriguing. And in those spaces, I felt very comfortable and could, think about challenges that I was having in the work that I was doing and how I would show up for my next meeting, because I had been exposed to the ideas of different institutions. And then, one of the last pieces of advice or something that I would share is that sometimes when you're feeling this way, like, oh, this is not my place, one of the things that again that I just step into is that vulnerability around how I'm feeling. And I seek out some coaching from a colleague or maybe even a executive coach that I've worked with in the past. And so I can then talk through these situations where I'm not feeling quite as comfortable and get into why is it that I'm not feeling comfortable. And that way, again, that next time I show up in the way that I want to show up in that space. All right. So like I said, we had other questions, but I wanted to get into that one because I know that that's a question that many new or even leaders who've been doing this work for quite some time, especially if you're transitioning into a new role, you're just trying to find your footing and find the thing that is going to make it feel good as a leader. And I did not want to miss out on having you answer that question. So as we've talked a little bit about fostering talent, like within an institution, sometimes the scariest part isn't so much like whether or not leadership is supporting people and investing in people internally. The scariest part is if you're sitting in that seat and you want to do that program, you want to stretch yourself. And so what type of advice would you give someone if they're looking at a professional development or a leadership development program and they're trying to figure out how to have that standout nomination? Like, how do you do that?
Well, I would say that when I made my application, it really helped for me to look for help. So we have a grant writer, part of our university, and that was enormously helpful. And I did have mentors that I went to also for help and to see sort of their lens of me, the things that I sort of take for granted or that I didn't realize, maybe from a different perspective was really important. That was also really helpful. And I had a couple of mentors that felt conflicted about the opportunity. And so just to get some pros and cons and to truly understand what those mean, so that I can really address that in the application as well. And I think that sometimes what we think are maybe our weaknesses are actually sometimes our strengths. I looked at coming from humanities, coming from a background of art, I teach painting, that where does that fit in leadership? Where does that fit in a larger, realm in a university? But then realizing that that should be something that connects in a larger stream of ideas where it brings ideas in a different way. I can look at problems differently than maybe my colleagues that don't come from a humanities background. And so that was actually a positive for this application. So I think that really focusing on investing in those mentors to help you move through that lens of how you see yourself was really helpful for me.
I think that's such great advice because it is really helpful to have someone else read the cover letter or the proposal, because what you are taking for granted is sometimes the most important thing. As Tina mentioned, your piece of experience that you think is just not as compelling turns out to be the thing that sets you apart, and having someone else read it really helps with your CV as well, because you might be underestimating your own strengths in that process.
Well, thank you both. Time flies when you are having fun. We have arrived at 45 after the hour, so quarter till. And Olivia is back with us. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, I won't take too much time, folks. I know we're right at the hour, but I wanted to point you towards the websites for both the Western Academic Leadership Academy and the WICHE Academy for Leaders in the Humanities. Both are accepting nominations right now. And so if you're interested, please do visit our website to learn more. I would be remiss if I did not take the time to thank both our hosts and our sponsors. And our hosts are the Western Academic Leadership Forum and the the Western Alliance for Community College Academic Leaders, the Alliance. These are two affinity groups that we run for chief academic officers in the West. And we love to foster new growth as well as current leaders. And these organizations are sponsored by a few really fantastic organizations. So we needed to shout them out and thank them. Finally, I wanted to remind everyone that the Western Academic Leadership Forum is holding our annual meeting this April 3rd through 5th in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so I hope that if you're interested in convening with us in person, that you consider joining us. So thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for your experience and your time. I hope everyone has an excellent remainder to their day. And best of luck and happy growth in 2024.